The top 10 people and groups for this unit. For our first one, we have Confucius. He was the founder of Confucianism, and it was a really big social factor in China, and a very big political and cultural factor as well. It was basically a belief system that dealt with the five main relationships and propriety within those relationships, and respect and filial piety, which is worshiping your ancestors. And it was very big in China and affected that a lot, because even now you can still see that you respect your elders, and like you respect adults and people that are older than you. And it was big then because it also influenced a lot of their laws and a lot of how they acted and how they ruled. The next one was Jesus, and he was sort of the founder or the main person in Christianity, and which was started in near the Roman Empire. With it was originally disliked by the Roman Empire because it went against what they believed, and but it turned into one of the main world religions afterwards, and that affected them culturally and socially. Ashoka was another big person. He was the ruler of the Mauryan dynasty in India, and he was the first emperor to bring Buddhism into the government at a large scale, and he built many stupas all around the empire, and he brought Buddhist principles into the government and made that a big religion in India, which later migrated to China, where it was even bigger. The next one was Chandragupta Maurya, and he was the founder of the Mauryan Empire, and then also Chandragupta, who was the founder of the Gupta Empire in India. The next is Shi Huangdi, who was the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, and he was also the person who brought the terracotta warriors, who built those, and also introduced legalism, the harsh punishments to Chinese government, which affected them politically and sort of culturally because they had such strict punishment, and they kind of grew off that, especially politically, because they used that a lot later. This one on the list is Liu Bang, and he was a leader of the Han dynasty, and he brought in the civil service exam based on Confucianism, which was talked about before, and it basically was another way of bringing Confucian principles into the government, and a way of making the government more based on merit, based on those Confucian principles, instead of just a hereditary bureaucracy. The next person is Caesar, who is the leader of Rome. Julius Caesar, and he was the leader of Rome. He declared himself emperor, which a lot of people disagreed with and eventually killed him because of it. But he introduced more plebeians, so the lower class, to the Roman Senate instead of just the patricians being involved in everything and ruling over that. He did a lot of good things for Rome, but because he declared himself emperor, he got killed because of it. The next group of people are the Huns, and they were a group of nomads who would go around, and they caused the fall of a lot of empires because they would attack them and try and take their land and take over their empires. And that was a very big external struggle for a lot of those empires who were already facing internal problems like peasant revolts and things like that, and disease especially. And then the last person would be Alexander the Great. He was from Greece, and he conquered a ton of land and spread Greek culture a lot, which brought about the Hellenistic age, and which was just the spreading of Greek culture throughout just everywhere, especially Europe and parts of Asia. Next are the top 10 events, which include political factors and social and cultural factors. First was the Hun invasions, which were just talked about, because they brought the fall of many empires, and it was a huge impact on those regions, and that's very big part of why they fell, in addition to those internal struggles. The next one is the spread of religion, which is in key concept 2.3. And basically, as the trade routes grew, you could see that religions like Christianity and Buddhism, and Hinduism and Buddhism would all spread, but they would sort of evolve and adapt to the different areas as they spread, so they wouldn't just stay the same. The next is spread of crops, because that brought the irrigation and the different forms of irrigation, like the water wheels and the wells, and the qanats, so different forms of irrigation, which affected agriculture as well. Next things are earlier back in the key concepts, so 2.1, which would be the beginning of the religion, the major religions. And so the first one would be Christianity, and that started with the death of Jesus, and it was initially hated by the Roman Empire because it went against what they had already believed in, which was talked about before. But it did spread through trade and through missionaries and merchants, and then had support from Rome and Constantine, and was eventually accepted and grew into a major religion. A next one could be considered like Greek philosophy, which had many gods based on things in nature, it could mean, and definitely sort of emphasized intellectual growth and could explain part of that. Another one could be Confucianism, which was started by Confucius's ideas, and which were based on the relationships and respect, which grew in China and affected the government and the culture there, which was discussed before. And a book for that was The Analect, which was put together by his followers. Another one is Buddhism, which grew in India with Ashoka, which was talked about before, and was sort of could be considered in response to Hinduism, because they had a caste system and they had very different beliefs than Buddhism. But Buddhism was that anyone could try, anyone could be a part of that faith, and it believed in the Four Noble Truths, and that life was suffering and that you had to overcome desire. And it was started by the Buddha, and this affected India politically because Ashoka brought it into the government, and culturally and socially because it was a major religion that people followed. And then the last one could be Taoism, and that's the yin and yang, and that everything about nature, and it was just a very natural thing, and that it wanted to stay out of government and believed that it shouldn't have to do with government, but it ended up really affecting the Chinese culture and intellectual developments, because it brought about new advances in medicine and poetry and metalworking and architecture. And